Later today, President Biden will make another effort to ease the rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine when he talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Here's why the stakes are so high. Check out the satellite images that show tens of thousands of Russian troops massed along the border with Ukraine. President Biden said earlier this month Russia would face severe consequences if it invaded Ukraine.
I've made it absolutely clear to President Putin, it's the last thing I'll say, that if he moves on Ukraine, the economic consequences for his economy are going to be devastating.
Joining us now to talk about this, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli with the president in Delaware, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, and Joel Rubin, who served as a deputy assistant secretary of state during the Obama administration. Good to see you all. Mike, what message does President Biden intend to send Vladimir Putin when they talk later this afternoon? And do we know why he wanted the conversation in the first place?
Well, Chris, when White House officials were briefing reporters yesterday about this planned phone call scheduled for 3:30 Eastern time this afternoon, they were blunt about the fact that they couldn't speak to why President Putin wanted this call. And that really speaks to the larger uncertainty about what precisely the Russian president has in mind here. Was he ever prepared to move ahead with a full-blown military invasion of Ukraine? Was he simply being provocative to be provocative, or is there something in between? Is he just testing the West? Is he seeking to continue to destabilize Ukraine's government? Whatever his intentions are, the White House clearly is calculating here that the longer Putin is willing to engage in diplomatic negotiations, the better. And that's why the president agreed to have this conversation today, where you can expect at a minimum he'll reiterate some of what you just heard from earlier this month, the clear threat from the U.S., from our Western allies, to impose severe economic pain on the Russian president, on Russia itself, should he invade Ukraine. He'll also reiterate that while they retain that right to impose those sanctions, their preferred outcome is diplomacy. You also heard earlier this week the announcement of a range of talks in January that the White House wants to see to be successful. Those talks were not expected to include either President Biden or President Putin, and Putin has been clear. He wants to engage only with the U.S. as much as possible, only with President Biden as much as possible. So in the days leading up to this, we've also seen the U.S. engaging at a high level with some of our closest allies. Secretary of State Tony Blinken yesterday speaking with Ukraine's president. The White House has said they will not engage in discussions with Russia about Ukraine without Ukraine being part of those conversations. The White House official telling me we should expect to see President Zelensky of Ukraine in the days ahead as well.
And Richard, the president says a military response is off the table. There will be severe economic consequences, however, if Russia invades Ukraine. Is Vladimir Putin really worried about this threat? Is there anything the U.S. or European allies could say to get him to back down?
Yes, he is sensitive to sanctions, especially if the United States is describing them as destructive as President Biden outlined. He said that they would devastate the economy. Obviously, Russia doesn't want its economy devastated. So there are levers to be pulled. Russia is in the midst or in the very, very final stages of putting together a pipeline going to Germany, the Nord Stream 2. It wants that pipeline finished. That is in the background of these talks. So there is leverage there. A lot of Russians keep their money abroad, including, many reports say, Vladimir Putin himself. So they are sensitive to sanctions. Russia has been under some sanctions, and some Russian individuals have been under sanctions for many years now. But U.S. officials keep stressing, and European officials are now singing from the same song sheet, that if this were to happen and there would be a massive escalation from Russia into Ukraine, that it would be a whole different kind of sanction, a different level than even we saw after Russia took over Crimea. So I think that certainly got the Russians' attention. And I think that's one of the reasons that you see Vladimir Putin wanting this call. There are a series of negotiations taking place on January 10th, 12th, and 13th. Much of those talks happening in Geneva and focusing on Ukraine, also focusing on U.S.-Russia denuclearization programs. And Vladimir Putin, according to his main spokesman, wants to set the agenda before those talks take place, wants to have one more conversation, detailed conversation. Remember, the last one took about 2 hours with President Biden, so that those talks in early January, mid-January, will go according to Putin's plan. He wants to set the agenda for those talks. He wants to make sure that U.S. State Department and Russian Foreign Ministry officials don't agree to anything that he hasn't already laid out with President Biden directly. So that, according to the Kremlin, is why he wants this call. He wants to set the agenda for those talks. But to answer your initial question, is Russia sensitive to sanctions? It certainly is. And Putin and his inner circle certainly are.
Joel, help us understand what informs the way that this administration might approach this. Not obviously just the call, but the bigger issue. Obviously, there's a difference between this administration and the last. Joe Biden has a more professional, more robust State Department. He actually listens to intelligence officials. But talk about the dynamics of this relationship and how these decisions get made.
Yeah, well, Chris, this is what the restoration of American global leadership through diplomacy looks like. It means that countries call the president of the United States to try to influence him. And in this case, Vladimir Putin is calling Joe Biden because Joe Biden is latched up with our allies in Europe, latched up with NATO, with Ukraine. We have a unified message. And as Richard just mentioned, Putin is trying to break that apart. He's trying to create discord because he's concerned about what this means going forward. And this is a stark contrast from a year ago from the previous administration, which essentially created confusion, when Donald Trump spoke to Vladimir Putin, it was an obsequious kind of conversation where Donald Trump essentially asked Putin what he wanted, and our European allies were afraid of us. So that all goes into the frame of how this administration approaches these talks. We are in sync. This administration wants to be in sync clearly with our European allies and says to Putin, we have positions that you need to adhere to. It's not the other way around.
Joel Rubin, Richard Engel, Mike Memoli, thanks to all of you. And coming up, Cincinnati's mayor declares